So let's have a look at the group policy order of precedence, or like I said, what policy will overwrite at what level and at what stage of your process. Of course, this is actually very important for any IT administrator or IT technician. Well, let's rather say that it was really important. It's actually starting to lose its importance with the new features that Microsoft implemented. But if you're running a old school domain, on-premise Active Directory, things like that, there's a 99% chance that you'll be using group policies or GPOs to set out rules, regulations, install software, remove things, update software with drivers and antivirus, all of that stuff. You can basically do everything with GPOs. But as we're now moving on to Azure Active Directory and we start looking at MDM software or mobile device management software, GPOs is now starting to lose its flexibility, mainly because Azure Active Directory does not support GPOs at all. So if you have an on-premise network with GPOs and you then decide that you also want to do something like a hybrid environment, when we start moving some stuff to the cloud, we are going to have to, how can I say, rethink or redo all our policies that we want to apply to computers. Because, like I said earlier on, Azure, Microsoft 365, Office 365, whatever you want to call it, does not support GPOs. So as more people are moving to the cloud, as more people are taking advantage of these new features and these new software and abilities, GPOs is starting to disappear, but it's going to take a while. It's going to take decades, mainly because any on-premise network will still use GPOs to set up its environment. Okay. So what we're going to concentrate basically or mainly on in this little section is just all to do with the precedence order of GPOs. Depending on where you've linked a GPO in what we call your OU structure. For those that are not aware, an OU structure, remember we talked about OUs and we're saying they are just containers. They're little areas where I can group stuff together, like I can have an OU or an organizational unit for all the server computers. I can have another OU for all of the client computers. I can go as far as having an OU for Windows 10 or Windows 8 or Windows 10 Pro or Windows 10 Enterprise, or I can have for only laptops or for only desktops or for only servers. It doesn't really matter. I can make that structure any way I want. An OU structure is just there to make it easier for you to organize, group things. And then once we've grouped certain devices, certain users, we can then start creating GPOs and then link them to a specific OU. Okay, where that policy will then apply to whoever is in that organizational unit. Okay, so there's a couple of rules, not that many that you need to worry about when we're talking about what OUs and what GPOs gets linked to what OUs at what level or what order of your structure. You always have to remember that the last or the master GPO will always overwrite something that has become before it. Even if you denied a certain thing on a GPO and another GPO comes along where you allow that same thing, that allow will overwrite the deny. So it's not like permissions where deny basically always wins. No. With GPOs, it's always the GPO that is processed last. That becomes the master, and whatever settings are in that GPO will be applied and will overwrite any other GPO that might have become before it or that's been processed before that one. So the first rule is what is the basic order of GPOs, meaning at what point in time will they be processed. They use the term precedence quite a lot. It just means processed. So as you can see here, this is a upside down pyramid where we've got the different levels that we can link GPOs to. So we've got right down here at the bottom, we've got local GPOs, because we're talking about local GPOs as well this week and during this course. And remember, a local GPO is a GPO that's only been set up on one computer. So it's not a group, it's just a local, just for that one computer. So that is the one that's processed first, is any local GPOs. Then the thing that's processed second are any GPOs that's linked to the site. So the entire site, be that Cape Town or Joburg or whatever site you have. Third processed is ones that are linked to a domain. If you have multiple domains within a site, the domain the domain GPO will then be processed third. And then the process or the GPO that is processed last is any GPO linked to an organizational unit directly. Okay. So what this means, this basically means that if I have an organizational unit and I link two GPOs to this, okay, we link the one GPO is linked, let's say, at the domain level, and the second GPO is linked at, let's say, at the organizational unit level. The one that's linked at the domain will be processed first, and it might have a deny permission somewhere, whereas the GPO linked at the OU will be processed second, in this case last, and this will then overwrite any previous permission that might have been added above. So if it was denied and on the one that's linked to the OU it was allowed, overall the allow will actually win. Okay, so that's the first thing that you need to worry about. Very simple, is what is the major order of how GPOs are linked or how they are processed, and that the GPO that's processed last will always overwrite any GPO that came before it. Okay, so that's the first rule. What you'll find normally if you get a question like that is they'll say that this GPO is linked to the domain and this GPO is linked to the OU. One has got a deny permission, one has got an allow permission. Which one will be the winner? And in this case, with the first rule, it will be the one that's linked to the actual organizational unit. That will be the winner. Okay. They do give you a little bit of examples, which is kind of nice from this guy. He took some screenshots and everything where you can see here. So this is a basic OU structure, if you've never actually seen one. And you can see here that all these little folders, these are basically all organizational units. Okay, so they're all OUs. It looks like a folder structure because that's what it is. We use them to group things. So here we have the domain. So I mean that is a domain link. Then we have the site right underneath it. That will be any GPO or that's linked to the site. And then we've got the actual individual OUs going down and down and down. So by looking at this specific little section over here, just want to clean some stuff up here so we can see. If we've got this domain, default domain policy that's linked at the domain level, and then we have another one called add local admins that's linked at the OU level. If these two will have to fight it out, the domain versus the OU one will win, because according to our rule that we just went through, the OU linked to the actual organizational unit is processed last, meaning it will win over and replace anything that might have been set up with the OU that's linked to the domain level or the site level. Okay. Cool. Second rule, what happens if I link multiple multiple GPOs to the same organizational unit? So I have an, let me just do this, so I have an organizational unit, and I then link multiple GPOs to this one organizational unit. Which one of these three will then be the winner? And to do that, we have to look at something called the link order of the GPOs. The link order basically tells you which is the master and which is the slave. So you can see here, there's actually have a little bit of again, an example where you can see we've got one OU here called add, or one OU called Windows 10. And this OU has 2 GPOs linked to it. Add local admins and disable first admin or first logon animation. And if I zoom in a little bit more, you can see that you have something called a link order. Link order 1 and link order 2. Okay. The one with the higher number, okay, so if we read through here, let me just zoom in a little bit. They say the lowest link order will be processed last. Okay, so in other words, the GPO with link order of 1 has the highest precedence, followed by link order 2. So in this case, GPO 2 will be processed first, and then GPO 1 will be processed last. So if these two fight, then what will happen is that in this case, GPO 1 will win because it's the one with the lowest number. Okay, so that's what if you have multiple GPOs linked to the same organizational unit, you then have to look at the link order of those GPOs, and the one with the lowest number gets processed last. And because it gets processed last, that means, of course, that that one will take master and will override anything that has happened before. Okay. So that's step or rule number 2, if you can think of it like that. Then we have rule number 3. They say, what about group policy, inheritance, and blocking? Okay. Now, just like permissions, if I have multiple OUs that are linked to one another, okay, so we'll make a quick OU structure. Whatever GPO I link at the top or at the parent will get inherited down to all of the child OUs. So that's normal inheritance. That's just like permissions work. But what I can do, if I so feel inclined, is that I can block inheritance, just like I can do with permissions. And if I block an inheritance, that means that the GPO will go to that OU, but because I've blocked it, it will not go down to anyone below that OU. But it will also be inherited down to this one because it will just take that little shortcut over there. Okay, so again, blocking a GPO just means that it will take effect on that level, but it won't go down. It won't inherit any more further down the chain or further down the OU structure, so that you don't overwrite maybe another GPO that you actually want to be there. Okay, so that's rule 3. Each GPOs gets inherited, just like permissions. And also, just like permissions, you can actually block them so that they don't inherit down to the rest of the structure itself. And again, they give you a little bit of an example. So you can see here at the moment, that we're looking at an OU here called computers. Let me just get my pen out again. So we've got an OU here called computers. Let me just use the right color. And this computer has got 1, 2, 3 GPOs linked to it. There's a GPO right here at the top, default domain policy and enable SCCM ports. These two will be inherited down because they were linked to the site up here. And then that was inherited down. So actually all of these OUs will actually get those two policies because it will inherit all the way down. And then also they've got another GPO in there that's linked directly to that OU called add local admins, if I can read the very bad writing in there. So this one OU has got 3 GPOs, 2 inherited and 1 that's been, you can call it explicitly or linked to that OU. Now, once we enable inheritance, so if we now go and on this little one, we actually go and disable the inheritance of the GPOs, what you will then see now, and now we're in the same organizational structure, but now there's only one GPO attached to it, the one that was directly linked to it. The 2 that was inherited has been removed because inheritance have been disabled. Okay, so a little example. And then the last rule is something called GPO enforcing, or enforcing a GPO. And what that means is a very simple rule that if I enforce a GPO, I basically break through any blocking of inheritance. Okay. So again, they give us a little example here. We've got the same one at the top. We've got the one OU that's got the one GPO linked because it's linked directly to it. It didn't inherit anything because I blocked it, remember, in the previous one. But if we then go and we say that I want to enforce that specific group policy, it will actually break through the block and it will actually add both GPOs to that device. One that's linked and the second one that was forced to break through the inheritance or the blocking of inheritance. Okay. So it's actually very simple. A lot less rules than we get with permissions. It's just like 4 basic rules. Rule number 1, we need to look at the order. If I can just go all the way to the top. We need to order or look at the order of where it was linked. Was it linked at the local PC, the site, the domain, or to the actual OU? The higher up, you take precedence. Second rule, oops, my computer froze there for a second. Second rule, if we've got multiple GPOs linked, then we have to look at the link order number that was assigned to that GPO when it was linked. The lower the number, the later the processing. And the later the processing will always overwrite something that became beforehand. Rule number 3, GPOs are inherited by child objects, just like permissions. But again, just like permissions, we can actually block inheritance so that it does not actually get inherited down the structure. But if we want to, we can force a GPO, which will then means it will break through that blocking of inheritance, and it will still be applied. Okay. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense now of what GPOs are. Yes, you can maybe call inherited versus explicit, just like we did with the permissions, where a GPO linked to a certain thing is explicit, and a GPO that gets inherited can be called an inherited GPO. But unlike permissions, the rule that explicit always overrides inherited does not always is true. You have to look at link order. You have to link at what level of the structure it is linked. All of those things. So it's not as explicit will always overwrite inherited. No, it's not like that. Depending on order, depending on number, depends on at what level that you actually link it as. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit more sense now. I, of course, will take some questions after this for anybody that might need a little bit more instruction. But, that's the basics of GPO inheritance.